You're there, Barb.
Hey,
You made it.
I did make it. My internet came back on.
Good for you. I had to call them twice yesterday to get mine
You had
back
to
on. Had to call the internet company twice yesterday to get mine back on.
Well, you know what I did? I turned off my computer and turned it back on again. And it reset.
Yeah. Well,
So
that's what they ended up doing when I called them. They reset it remotely from wherever they were.
Oh,
It affected my TV and my tablet both.
that's maddening.
Yep. All right, Miss Katina, where are you?
All right, I just finished my Bible page.
I was just saying,
I
where's
am
Miss
here.
Katina?
I am here. I was trying to get the room situated. It's a lot of
Hi,
key pressing
Katina.
all at the beginning.
Barb made it, as I see.
Yay.
That's what I say.
I don't know who else is coming. Do you know anybody else?
I have not. I just got an email from Jonathan saying he could not make it tonight, but I haven't
Okay.
heard from you. I don't know if Thursdays work for people or not. So we'll see.
It works for me because I'm home all the time. So
It works just fine for me, but I have to move upstairs because Thursday is cello lesson night for my kids. So you can't hear anything except cello downstairs.
no.
So I'm up here sitting in my bedroom, hoping it's quiet enough to be heard for the next little bit.
Well, cello's not all bad unless it's the very beginners.
Oh
Well,
no,
the
they're
one that's
very
playing,
accomplished.
yeah,
Are they?
so the one that's playing now has been playing for 10 years. So
Oh my.
it's quite
Yeah.
lovely, but also quite loud.
He is
So
quite an accomplished cellist, I will tell you.
Oh, thank
He
you.
amazes me with what he can do. So, Marcia's having a hard time here.
I'm just rearranging so Paul can come on too.
You all are in a different room today.
We are. I tried to Zoom the meeting this morning, and I don't know whether I was doing it right or not, because nobody Zoomed in. So I felt like I did on my 13th birthday when I invited everybody to a party and nobody came.
Oh, well, I know that Zoom fatigue is what they're calling this new category of feeling, and it's a very real thing. We are on Zoom so much that I know a lot of people are just saying, "I'm out, I'm done," and
Yeah.
even with things they really enjoy.
But Miriam came over to the house.
Oh, good.
Now, Maureen tried to Zoom in and couldn't do it. And so I called her and she joined us by phone. So we did have 3 of us met today.
Good, good.
So next week we're studying James. And I went over to church today to put food in the blessings box. And I left 2 copies of the readings there on the credenza. So
Excellent. Well, I hope I'll be able to join you next week. I haven't looked ahead at our schedule yet, so.
how are your classes going?
They're good. We changed the layout. You know, it was supposed to be all in Dubuque and all in 1 week. And when we moved to doing it online, everybody said, there's no way I can be on the computer 8 hours a day right now. It's just, you know, we've got other responsibilities. So she spread it out over several weeks. So now we're going to be going until July, but just in smaller chunks. Um, She's been very gracious, and it's been a really interesting group and interesting class, and the focus of it has been very timely with what's happening in the world. So,
Yeah.
As was your sermon last week.
well, thank you. No, that was not
Yes.
a coincidence. That was you know, definitely reactionary, and will be, I think, for a time. I think the world calls for a few weeks at least. So there needs to be a whole shift in attitude. So.
Especially as you're approaching July 4th.
Yes, and election season, and there's just so many things, so many considerations right now that this needs to be something is well thought through as a church. I'm bringing actually a document that I drafted, but I want Session to help me redraft and polish it up so that the church makes an official statement on
Good.
their stance on anti-racism. I think
Yeah.
the church must speak. I don't think we can be quiet.
I thought how timely our Bible study for tonight is in that regard as well.
Yeah.
My goodness, the oneness and the unity and hello.
Absolutely. And the history of Ephesus, I thought, was so relevant to what we're talking about now, that it was a divided church or a divided location. But it was all, like he called, under the ground, that it was
Yes.
literally underground. But yeah. Well, let's get into it then, since we've kind of thank you, Marcia, for that.
Segue.
Call me Segway.
Yes, exactly. What are your initial thoughts before I get into my notes, or initial thoughts? I loved this. I thought this was my favorite one so far. I loved this study.
This one was the most confusing of the three so far for me. I had to listen to it 3 times before I figured out what he was trying to do and what he was trying to get at. And and I also cheated. I'm also cheating on you all. I'm also reading the book. So
Paul got his copy yesterday.
yeah.
Oh, good.
So thoughts on it. Let's see. The first thing I wrote down was to have the joy and union that we have as Christians, that we can experience that joy and union.
Yeah.
And I guess I hadn't thought about us as being the first group to pan-tribal. I thought it was an interesting concept that, it doesn't matter who your mama is, that we're all equal.
So true.
That was the thing that struck me as I was listening to him and also reading the pan tribal. They were all one. We're all part of the one, and so on. And the way he goes about bringing us into that with that prologue from John was just really, really good, I thought.
Yeah.
Once I understood where he was going, that I was able to focus in on that and picked up on that. That was my first note here. That we're all part of one group. First time ever in history that's happened with a particular religious movement. And I thought that was something new I hadn't even thought about, but I guess it's true.
Mm-hmm.
I think the prologue was even more than that. It's we're all one with everything, including
Yes.
nature and all of the universe.
Yeah. who or what we are, what color we are, what gender we are, it doesn't make any difference anymore. We're all part of one family, one group, which is the way it was supposed to have been from the very beginning.
Right.
So again, we go back to what Sarah said last week. We go back to the beginning. You know, as we finished up with the Gospel of Mark, to go back to Galilee, we go back to the beginning. And that's what we're doing here. We're going back to the beginning, back to the Garden of Eden that God created. And where everything was all together in one place. And there, you know, it wasn't until after, you know, whatever that was intervened and tempted them to partake of the fruit. It was all, we were all together. The whole creation lived together in harmony together. So, and he points that out at one point in the book. He talks about the vision in Isaiah when all the creatures come to, where all humanity and all creatures come together, and the lion shall lie down with the lamb, and you know the child shall play over the hole of the asp, and so on, without fear, and so on. I thought that was a, you know, the peaceable kingdom. The whole idea of the peaceable kingdom is I wish we could have that now.
I wondered if that's what he was getting at the end when he talked about the garden and that we're the garden and
Yes.
we can show that peaceableness, that, you know, that grace, that, you know, just the oneness that was in the first garden, and that we can be his garden.
Yes. And we have that capacity within us. That was one thing you get emphasizing over and over again. It's within us. It's a part of who we are. It's how we were created. And we were created to live together in community, you know, in relationship with one another and with the rest of the world, with the whole cosmos, in fact.
Right. I had never. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, how many of you guys think that people understood that back when he wrote that? I mean, it just is so out there and obscure.
Yeah, I thought that too, and wondered how, you know, whether John really that's the way really John thought. But the more I thought about it, yeah, I could see where that could be the possibility. He's trying to give them hope. He's trying to give them encouragement in the midst of strife, in the midst of everything that's happening to them, and looking at, you know, anytime there's major change like that, there is going to be strife, there's going to be hurt, there's going to be pain. And this is a way to live through it.
It's just that to me, it seems like he is creating his own story out of the parables, like the stones at the wedding of Cana weighing the same as a man and a woman, and that's reaching to me.
I had never thought of the metaphors that he used, and I wrote those down too, that, you know, the idea of us being made of the incorruptible substance of God, and that when he called Peter the rock, that's what he was talking about. I thought, okay, how do you get to that? You know, it's just, you know,
He made some leaps to me also, yeah.
real
I love the story. I love the message. I just am not sure if he's creating it himself or if that came out of John.
He is using, from the way, and having read the book that he refers to in the book, in these footnotes and so on, that was written by a man by the name of Brian Schwimme, who is a cosmologist, and looking at the way the universe was created, and that we are all come from stardust. We're all from all the molecules that were created in that moment when the universe came into existence.
Mm-hmm.
At that moment of the so-called, quote, Big Bang. And that's where I think that's where he's coming from with that. And that also picks up with what Campbell talks about in his book on religion and so on. He talks about that we are all part of that creation. We all have that same, what is it? He uses the word breath in his book. And that's what makes us who we are. And so on. It makes us different from other creatures and other people around the world. That's just, that's where I made the connection when you're talking about that.
And his metaphor about the vessels being filled with water, that we're vessels filled with water, and that Jesus turns us into.
I think I'm saying this to a group of preachers. We're all preachers and teachers in some way in the church. You all are preachers and teachers, and so this will not come as a surprise. As a pastor, I know that I will witness something and then tell the story, and my kids will sometimes in the car say, "That's not how that happened," and I'll say, "Well, it was. I mean, the heart of the story was true, although sometimes, when I retell it, the details may be slightly different." And so I wonder if that's, what John has done. John is a master preacher, that, witnessing the wedding at Cana, perhaps there was a literal wedding, and John uses the metaphor of what has happened. Were the vessels the actual weight? Maybe that's a detail John added, because then we can use the story. And I think that would still be speaking truth to what happened. Whether it literally happened or figuratively happened, I think as a pastor becomes less relevant to me than the truth that it speaks.
No, I agree with you. I agree that the message is everything, but I wonder if even John knew what in the world this man was going to make out of this message.
I bet he had some sort of, maybe not, but John is so metaphor. I mean, John just oozes and drips beautiful metaphors throughout.
Go lay down,
I'm surprised if there wasn't some intention behind it. Of course, maybe our author has read something new in, and that would be the work of the Holy Spirit, I think.
That could be, yeah. And honestly, it's beautiful, and I love the thought of the transition and the transformation. I love that.
When you think about it, every time you read the scriptures, something new comes out to you, and you're in a different place, or the Spirit is speaking to you in some way that, it's just always get something new. I think as often as I've taught Sunday school, and have taught the same thing, and yet each time they're new.
Yeah.
They're new.
It's like when you go through the lectionary over and over and over, and every time you preach the same scripture, it comes out different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because you're different. You're changing time.
Your mind does hopefully grow.
It's been very interesting since I moved back down here. I finally found a lot of my sermons. Barb has a lot of them. I gave her 2 boxes of my sermons when I left Cincinnati, and then I found 3 more boxes downstairs when I was cleaning up downstairs. And one of those is the boxes from my very first sermons, when both in seminary and in my first pastorate. And what I wrote back then is very, very different from what I'm doing now, if I'm preaching now. I can't believe that I got away with what I got away with in seminary. With some of the stuff that I wrote back then. It's amazing how different things change over time. And as your life experience changes, you understand the scriptures differently at different phases in your life, and so on. And that has come home to me just recently. I've been going through those old sermons to see how much I have changed. And boy, have I really changed a lot in terms of that. And our interpretation of scripture has changed a lot, and the ability to interpret scripture. has changed over the years as well. As my own understanding and knowledge has grown about that, my preaching has changed as a result of it. And so on. The thing that struck me, and it's the one when he talks about the passion, not the passion, the crucifixion, and when Jesus dies, that one I had never looked at it that way. I didn't even realize John was that so different from the other three gospels in his description of the crucifixion and what happens at the moment that Jesus dies. He just says, he takes a breath and says, "It is finished." He bows his head and he dies. You know, it's not, you don't go through what Peter and Paul and what Mark and Matthew and John and Luke do in their stories. John's story is quite different. And in the other stories, none of the others are there. The women are way off at a distance and nobody else, none of the disciples are there. In this story, there's Mary, his mother, Mary Magdalene, and quote, the beloved disciple, and the unnamed disciple. There is an unnamed disciple that he talks about in there. And, and when we put the story together at Easter time, we tend to conflate all four of those gospels into one.
Right.
When each of those stories is different and each has a different meaning for the community that they're writing to. And that's something that I'm just beginning to understand as a result of what he's doing here and the different communities and what was needed in those communities to give people hope and understanding. And so I found this one has been very helpful and very revealing in terms of, what little I did know, it's added to it even more so.
Or what little we thought we knew.
Yes.
I thought half the book of John was about the Last Supper, and I discovered from listening to him, this is before the Last Supper.
Yes. All this takes place. Jesus dies before Passover.
Yes.
And I did know that. Because I had read Raymond Brown's book on the death of Jesus, and so on. And so he talks about that when he talks about the Gospel of John, that John's Gospel is very different from the other three because it does not take place at Passover. It's in the 3 days prior to Passover.
Right.
So that part didn't surprise me so much as some of the other stuff that he talked about.
So
What did you think of it, Katina? You haven't said much. I asked Katina what she thought about the whole. You said you loved it. What was it you liked about it?
Yeah. Well, I will. Marcia, you were going to say something, and then I'll.
I was trying to all happened before Passover. When was Passover for Jesus and the disciples then? I mean, was there no Passover dinner? That I've always thought that now I'm really confused.
Well, I do think when we get into trying to recreate the literal truth of minute by minute what happened, that's when we get into stumbling blocks and people get, and that's where people start to throw up their hands and say this whole thing it's a sham because the pieces don't always fit together nicely. And I think we have to get past that when I read 4 different newspaper accounts, the details don't necessarily line up. It does not mean that it didn't happen. There was, things were reported differently and accounted for differently. And you have to remember how much time has passed since, this wasn't written the next morning. And so, the details of it are not going to be always literal, historical, accurate minute by minute truth, which doesn't have any impact, I think, on the truth of it, on the truth that it speaks to us. So it can be overwhelming when the details don't line up. That can be a source of frustration. We just have to remind ourselves that John was more focused on the metaphorical truth than on the details on reporting. John never, what was the birth story? I mean, in the beginning, it's so very different. John never concerned himself with reporting the details, more with reporting the truth. So.
Hey, he wrote Revelation. What can I say?
Well, no, there's some questions with the one who wrote John and the Gospel and one who wrote
Somebody.
Revelation is the same person.
Yes, true. So
John of Ephesus is quite different from John of Patmos.
So what struck me, and Bill said, what did you love about it? What struck me was I feel like that God just stepped right out of the cosmos and put this in our path this week. In fact, I'll be honest, I honestly almost pulled our study, because when the world started to change so rapidly, I thought, is it silly for us to continue into a study just because I've said we're going to do it, when the world needs to hear this message right now? And I have a study lined up ready for us to go, to talk about racism and the church's response. And so I thought, we've got 3 more weeks in this. Should I pull it and move on? And I've ultimately decided that we needed to spend some time in the Gospels before we could move into how the world responds. That if we're not grounded in the Gospels, we're not ready to respond. So I decided to keep this study. And then when I walked into this one, I thought, okay, God, there you are. Talking about that there is a table come. And I just wrote that in huge letters. There is a table come. And there are no barriers to that table. That any barrier to that table is human created, not God created.
Exactly.
Boy, we have sent out invitations to all the people that we want to come, and we have locked the doors to people we don't want to come. But those were all our doing. That was never the intention of the table. So I just highlighted all over this thing about the timeliness of the inclusivity, radical inclusivity. This is, he said this is the first time in history that religion has taken a stance on unity. And this is groundbreaking. I don't think we allow ourselves sometimes to be shocked by how shocking this is. That for the first time in history, the Creator has spoken out and taken a stance on unity. And here we are, 2,000 years later. More so really, because we're looking at even before the Gospels, and we still are bickering over who's allowed at the table.
Yes.
Yeah. So how does this hit you does it hit you in the gut this week? How so? I assume you all felt some, you said this was timely. I assume you felt some call to the current condition.
Yeah. Especially the issues around the police brutality is the one that has hit me the hardest. I've always, upheld the police and thought they were always on our side. And here I'm seeing stuff that I didn't know they were capable of doing and actually doing to people. And that has been the part that has disturbed me the most, especially with the death of George Floyd and the way that took place, and the look on the guy's face as he was holding him down on the ground was just like, ha ha, look at what I'm doing. And I'm going, that's not the way the police are supposed to act. It's not the way they're supposed to behave. And it just bothers me. Shortly after that appeared, Alex Chapman's husband, CT, don't you, Katina?
Yes.
He's a police officer. And his post right after that was, don't judge every police officer that way, because we're not all like that. We have police officers that I work with who go into these communities. Are you willing to go into those communities and do what they do? Are you willing to go in and talk to Black people on a regular basis? Are you willing to go in and play basketball with the kids on the street that are out playing with nothing else to do, to give them, watch over them? And I'm going, okay, he just hit me in the gut again. What do we do? How do we do it? How do we respond? And I just thought, CT, you need to be a preacher.
I've thought of him many times over the last few weeks, and one of my best friends from seminary, his wife is actually a pastor in Cleveland. I mean, not pastor, a police officer in Cleveland, and so I feel like on the one hand, I hear these cries of police brutality, and I think, yes, absolutely, this has got to change. And then I know such wonderful, wonderful human beings who are in the office that they are in because they truly want to create change. And so it feels like a sticky place to be right in the middle. But I think isn't that where we're called to be as Christians, is right there in the middle
Yeah.
where we hear these calls from both sides, and we're called to be right in the middle and offer that voice of unity.
And I think that's what the church has abandoned that over the last several, for many years. For a long time, the church was the voice of morality, and now we seem to have lost that. We've been more focused on the self-salvation, the salvation of the individual, and not the salvation of the whole community, of everyone who is involved.
And it brings us right back to our study.
Yeah.
The table isn't available to all.
Yeah.
And we as Christians have as bad a reputation as some of the police officers.
Yes, we do. Oh, yeah. And they still do today. We still have those kinds of.
Absolutely.
And we're never more separated than we are on Sunday morning.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
And what is one of our most divisive things is over communion. Who gets it? How do you take it? Do you have to be baptized? How do you get baptized anyway? And so we've divided over the very thing that was supposed to bring us unity.
Yeah.
We're so broken.
We are. The church is.
So our study asks us to ask this question, and I highlighted it, and then I thought, oh, that's an awkward thing to say. So I'm going to ask the question, and if you have an answer, you're welcome to say it, or you can just sort of imagine as the church. But the question is, who is the most challenging? And not a name, but as a group, who's the most challenging to invite to the table? Because obviously it's not easy, or we would be doing it. And I don't necessarily mean for that to sound like we're saying, oh, well, this group, they're hard to love. But as a church, where are you seeing us stumble? Where are we not doing a good job? Maybe I think is a better way of asking that question. Where are we not doing a good job of inviting people to the table?
I think it depends on each individual in the church. I think that as a whole, we would say all are welcome. But at the same time, there are things that make each of us uncomfortable in their own way. And I struggle with, I'd like to say that I'm not prejudiced, but I can remember being in Atlanta and dropping my boss off at night, and there I was rerouted through the Black neighborhood, and there were people sitting out on their stoops and locked the doors. and I don't know that I would have done that in a white neighborhood. Yeah, so I am prejudiced. Do I love Charlie and his family? Sure do. They're people I know. It's the unknown that we're afraid of.
For Sunday, my sermon for Sunday is basically the claim is, I'm a racist and so are you. And we didn't mean to be. I hate it. I hate it about myself.
I know.
And so it's our call as Christians, if we see it in ourselves and we hate it in ourselves, it's time to clean it.
And we have to, first off, we have to name it.
Yes.
We have to name it.
Yes.
And that's the hard part, is to name it.
Isn't it?
I think.
But then, the study tonight talked about that. You got to cleanse the temple, right after. The next thing to do is to cleanse the temple. When you see it, when your eyes are open to it, there's no excuse to then not, before when you didn't know that, then that's one thing. But when your eyes are open to it, you can't look away. That
Yeah.
cleans the temple.
Yeah. Well, I hope that they are now a little bit more. But
Right.
I just responding to your question, I think that we are afraid of anyone who's different from us. And those are the ones that we have trouble extending the table to. And we may try to be friendly to them when they come in our church, but we don't even know how to relate to them or how to make them comfortable. We probably make them uncomfortable. We're so glad to see them, but it just seems like we have a hard time with that, like the LGBTQ and just everybody that's different, people that are.
People
I
that,
have
you know,
8 churches, and I have one church that resents the other church because they have more money in that church. It just is unbelievable, the differences that you can line up against each other and decide who's right and who's wrong.
Several years ago, when I was still in Cincinnati, in one of the churches, it's a very, very small church. Then I only have 10 members left in the congregation, even now. And a friend of mine who is also a pastor, was a pastor in Northern Kentucky, was off one Sunday, so he decided he come to church at Wilson Church in Cincinnati. He came in the door. No one spoke to him. No one offered him a bulletin. Nobody showed him to a seat. Nobody asked who he was or how he felt, how he was doing, or anything like that. And after the church was over, he and I went to lunch together. We didn't go with the usual group that I usually went with. And he was telling me what he felt like. He says, it was though they didn't want me in the building. They didn't want to have anything to do with me. They didn't want to know who I was or what I was doing there. They never asked. They didn't ask me any questions whatsoever. And I ended up sitting on the far side of the sanctuary away from the pulpit, and nobody came to speak to me. Nobody, and they didn't even offer me the offering plate. They just walked right by me with the offering plate.
Wow.
And I said, would you be willing to come and talk to my session about that? And he said, sure. So at the next session meeting, he came, and I introduced him to them and said he was here 3 Sundays ago. He would like to share with you his experience of what he experienced when he came into this building. And he told them, and the look on their face, on the faces of those 8 people around the table that night, they were stunned that they'd never even thought about what they were doing and how they reacted when strangers came in the building. After that, it changed. It changed immediately. However, they were never able to really grow. They were present to people who walked in the building. There was somebody there who offered them a bulletin, who showed them to a seat, who invited them to stay for coffee after church, who asked how they were doing, and if there was anything that they could do for them. Did they need a prayer or request or whatever? And then that would be passed to me before the service started. And that happened over the first, 4 years I was there. After that happened, and then it suddenly stopped again. And I questioned, why did you stop doing what you were doing and welcoming people? It wasn't doing any good. I said, how do you know it wasn't doing any good? I said, maybe you did affect a person's life that day, and they might have found someplace else to go, but that's fine. They found that they were being met and received on a friendly basis. We've got to stop this, folks.
On time, but I want to share with you a story. This is actually a great segue. It's in the book, so you'll get it when you get it. But the author says he went to go walk a labyrinth, and in a labyrinth, if you've never done it, is very symbolic of our journey. It goes back and forth, and there are no wrong turns, but you feel like you're going the wrong way all the time. And he says he went out to walk the labyrinth, and when he got out there, it was covered in goose droppings, covered. And he said he learned that day that the journey to God is covered in poop. And I thought that is a perfect analogy. and it's messy, and it's never clean in what we expect, but it is what it is, and that's the journey, and I thought that was so beautiful. Let me close this in prayer.
Okay.
Holy One, we give you thanks that you walk with us even when the journey is covered in poop. And we just ask that you would help us to find our way and walk carefully over the droppings so that we can find beauty in the path. And we ask that you would help us to lead others in this path as well. And we give you thanks for the table that is open to all. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.